Welcome to the Courage of a Leader podcast, and welcome to this episode in my Courage in Action series. For this series, I'm making note of key questions that leaders ask me, that team members ask me about leadership, and I provide practical, pragmatic, real answers to those questions. That's my aim. So, today I will be talking about the traits of a courageous leader. When someone is demonstrating the courage of a leader, what does that entail? What does that look like? I'm going to start with a provocative statement. I believe that there's a moment that all extraordinary leaders have had. Those engaging, inspiring, courageous, and amazingly effective leaders out there, that there's a moment that they've all had. And it's the moment they realize leadership is less about having answers and more about having courage. The courage to make difficult decisions when there isn't a perfect option, the courage to have conversations that you'd rather avoid, the courage to stay grounded when everyone else is anxious, and the courage to lead authentically instead of quote unquote performing leadership. Because the truth, leadership today is complicated. People are exhausted. Change feels constant. Trust feels fragile and not as present as it should be. Right? And many leaders are carrying pressure that they rarely talk about. And yet, what teams need most right now, it's not perfection. They need leaders who are self aware, emotionally intelligent, and trustworthy, and willing to lead with courage, even in the uncomfortable moments. So, in today's episode, I'm talking about the qualities and the traits that actually matter in leadership right now, not the outdated leadership stereotypes or the title driven version of leadership or authority. We're talking about the kind of leadership that creates trust, connection, resilience, and real impact. Because courageous leadership isn't about being fearless, it's about being willing to lead anyways, even when we do have fear. So I have some notes in front of me, and you're going to see me looking at those from time to time. And I want to tell you where they came from. In the work that I do, I get the opportunity to coach leaders, facilitate leadership programs, and speak to teams and organizations. And that has me observing and participating in countless conversations with people who are trying to lead well in very real and often very challenging situations. And I started noticing patterns. No matter the industry or level of leadership, people were asking many of the same questions. So I started writing those questions down and paying attention to what actually works in response to those questions. So, not just leadership theory, I want to get to the practical behaviors, the mindset shifts, the courageous choices that consistently help leaders build trust, strengthen teams, and lead more effectively. So, this episode is essentially a collection of those observations, lessons, and leadership conversations. And my hope is, as we walk through the following 5 questions together, you'll not only hear something that resonates with you, you'll walk away with something specific that you can immediately apply in your leadership. So, here's the first question: what actually makes someone a courageous leader? Well, I'll tell you, it's not their title. A title might give someone authority, yet it does not automatically make them a leader. Real leadership shows up in behavior. It shows up in how someone handles pressure, how they treat people, and whether they're willing to make difficult decisions when it would be easier to avoid them. Courageous leaders are willing to step into discomfort instead of managing around it. They have the hard conversations. It looks like addressing tension in a meeting instead of pretending that it isn't there. It looks like giving clear feedback instead of hinting and hoping that someone figures it out. It looks like saying, you're right. I handled that poorly. instead of becoming defensive. It looks like checking in on a struggling employee, even when your schedule is packed. They take responsibility when things go wrong. They make decisions aligned with the values, even when those decisions aren't popular. And some of the strongest leaders I've worked with weren't the ones with the highest titles. They were the people that others trusted, the people who created calm during uncertainty, the people willing to speak up when something needed to be said. Leadership is influence. It's not about control. It's about creating an environment where people feel seen, challenged, supported, and inspired to move forward. And that kind of leadership requires courage because it asks us to consistently choose growth over comfort. One practical takeaway here: if you want to grow as a leader, stop asking, "What authority do I have?" and start asking, "What impact am I creating?" And I would even say, "What impact am I committed to creating?" If you've read my book or heard me speak, you've likely heard of me talk about the concept of a leadership legacy. A leadership legacy is the purpose of our leadership, what we're most committed to creating and bringing to every relationship, conversation, meeting, project, initiative. And I say that it's that commitment that has us stepping through natural, normal human considerations, going beyond the concerns of our ego. It has us acting courageously. People may comply with authority, yet they follow leaders that are courageous, even when those leaders are asking them to do the challenging work. Okay, second question. Which leadership traits matter most in today's environment and why? The leadership traits that matter most are adaptability, emotional intelligence, courage, and trustworthiness. I think these are interrelated. The reason these matter so much right now is because people are leading through constant change, uncertainty, complexity, pressure. People don't need leaders who pretend to have all the answers. They need leaders who can create clarity without false certainty. They need leaders who stay grounded under pressure. They need leaders who can navigate change while helping people feel valued and connected. So, for example, during uncertainty, a weak leadership response sounds like, "We're on top of it. We got it. All right, we'll get back to you." A courageous leadership response sounds more like, "We don't have every answer yet. Yet here's what we do know. Here's what we're prioritizing. Here's how we'll keep communicating." That kind of honesty builds trust. One of the biggest shifts I've seen over the years is that technical expertise alone is no longer enough. You can be incredibly smart and still lose your team if people don't trust you, don't feel safe with you, or don't believe that you genuinely care. Emotional intelligence matters so much. Leaders need the ability to recognize what's happening emotionally in themselves and in others, and to be able to respond intentionally instead of reactively. And courage matters because leadership today requires difficult decisions. We need leaders who are willing to take the charge and make those decisions. And that requires balancing competing priorities, having limited information with high expectations. Those demonstrating the courage of a leader, they don't avoid tension. They learn to lead through it. So if you're wondering where to focus your leadership development, start here. Can people trust you? Can you adapt? Can you stay emotionally grounded under pressure? Can you communicate clearly during uncertainty? Those are the traits people are looking for in leaders right now. Third question: how do self awareness and emotional intelligence strengthen the courage of a leader? Self awareness and emotional intelligence are foundational to courageous leadership because you can't lead others effectively if you don't understand yourself and the impact you're having. A lot of leadership challenges are actually self leadership challenges. For example, sometimes leaders avoid difficult conversations not because they lack skill, yet because they're uncomfortable with the conflict. Sometimes leaders micromanage because they're struggling with fear or lack of control. Sometimes leaders react defensively because the feedback feels personal. And here's how that often shows up in everyday leadership. A leader redoes work instead of coaching. They ask for constant updates, not because the team needs alignment, yet because the leader needs reassurance. They shut down ideas quickly because disagreement feels threatening to them. Or they walk out of a meeting frustrated without ever communicating what's actually bothering them. Take a look candidly and see if you can recognize yourself in any of those statements I just said. Self awareness helps leaders recognize those patterns. It helps them pause long enough to ask, what's really driving my reaction right now? And emotional intelligence allows leaders to respond intentionally instead of emotionally escalating situations. Now, that doesn't mean that leaders need to be emotionless, like non emotive. It means they become emotionally disciplined. They learn how to regulate themselves under pressure. So they're not being reactive, right? And causing stress to escalate. They learn how to listen instead of immediately defending. They learn how to recognize what others may be experiencing. And they show their care and their passion in appropriate ways. Building self awareness requires honesty, and that's where courage comes in. It takes courage to acknowledge blind spots. It takes courage to admit when you handled something poorly. It takes courage to ask for feedback and then genuinely listen to what's offered. And leaders who develop those skills create stronger relationships, healthier teams, more trust leads to more performance and more results. So here's a simple practical exercise. After a difficult interaction, ask yourself, what was I feeling? What triggered me? What outcome was I trying to protect? And what would a more intentional response look like? That reflection builds leadership maturity over time. Question 4. How do leaders build courageous leadership traits? That last exercise is a great one. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about leadership is that people either naturally have these qualities or they don't. And that's simply not true. Leadership traits are developed through practice, reflection, feedback, and intentional behavior over time. So, for example, confidence is built by doing difficult things consistently. Trustworthiness is built through follow through. Emotional intelligence is built through self awareness and reflection, through observing others, through getting feedback, through having reflective practices, journaling or processing or scheduling reflection time. Courage is built every time a leader chooses discomfort over avoidance. So, if you want to strengthen courageous leadership traits, start small and make it practical. If you want to become a better communicator, ask for feedback after meetings. How did my messaging come across? Right? If you want to build trust, follow through on small commitments consistently. If you want to become more adaptable, stop treating change like an interruption and start treating it like part of leadership. If you want to strengthen emotional intelligence, pause before reacting and get curious about your emotions instead of immediately acting on them. And I'd say one of the fastest ways leaders grow is by increasing reflection. Most leaders move from meeting to meeting, problem to problem, without ever slowing down long enough to ask what worked, what didn't, How did people experience me in that interaction? What would I do differently next time? That reflection is where leadership growth happens. Right? So, like I already said, build reflection time and processes into your day to day. I also think leaders grow faster when they stop trying to project the image of being a good leader and instead focus on becoming a better leader. Focus on becoming a better leader. That mindset shift changes everything because the courage of a leader isn't built in one defining moment. It's built through repeated everyday choices. Question 5. Can vulnerability strengthen leadership credibility and trust? If you've been listening, you know the answer. Yes, absolutely. Yet, vulnerability in leadership is often misunderstood. So let's say what it's not. Vulnerability doesn't mean oversharing. It doesn't mean emotional instability. And it doesn't mean leaders lose authority. Healthy vulnerability means leaders are human, they're honest, they're authentic. They're willing to admit mistakes, they're willing to ask for input. It means we're acknowledging challenges instead of pretending like everything is perfect. And that kind of authenticity builds trust because people don't connect with perfection. They connect with honesty, with humanity. For example, vulnerability is not a leader emotionally dumping stress onto their team. Healthy vulnerability sounds like this is a challenging season. I don't have every answer yet. I'd value your perspective on this. Or I made the wrong call, and here's what I learned from it. That kind of leadership creates psychological safety. It gives other people permission to speak honestly, ask questions, take ownership, take risks, and grow. And honestly, courageous leadership requires vulnerability because it's vulnerable to say, I was wrong. I don't have all the answers. This is difficult. I need feedback. I need your input. Yet leaders who can do that often build stronger cultures than leaders who constantly try to project perfection. People trust leaders who are both confident and human. Confident and human. And the strongest leaders know that those two things can absolutely exist together. As I wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with this. The strongest leaders are not the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones who create trust, the ones that help people feel seen and valued, the ones willing to have hard conversations, make difficult decisions, and lead with both courage and humanity. And the good news is those qualities can be developed. One conversation at a time, one decision at a time, one courageous choice at a time. So, as you think about the questions we covered today, I'd encourage you to reflect on this. Where is leadership asking you to be more courageous right now? Maybe it's a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's setting a boundary. Maybe it's trusting your team more. Maybe it's letting go of perfection. Or maybe it's simply believing that you already have the capacity to lead well, even while you're still growing. Because demonstrating the courage of a leader is not about getting everything right. It's about being willing to keep showing up intentionally. Thank you for joining me today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with another leader who may need the reminder that courage is not something that leaders are born with. It's something we practice. Until next time, keep demonstrating the courage of a leader.